Hello, everyone, and welcome to Talking Insights from Esomar. We are welcoming you from Amsterdam, from the city where Esomar is actually located, where we are also celebrating our annual Congress. I have the pleasure to have with me one of the speakers in this event. I have with me Maria Bruder. Hi, welcome.
Hello, thank you for having me.
It's great to have you here. Well, I think you will be talking tomorrow, right?
Yep.
We will go a little bit through everything that you will be covering. I'll try not to go too much into detail, so like to leave a bit of the suspense and a bit of the anticipation for tomorrow. But I would like to invite you to present yourself, to explain a bit what is your role, the BBC, what the company you work for, in what area you work, and a bit more of yourself.
Okay, great. So my name's Maria. I am a researcher with the BBC World Service, which is a little bit separate to BBC UK. So BBC UK has a lot of insight teams that deal specifically with all of its different entities, whereas the World Service has one insight team that deals with everything. For those people who don't know, the World Service includes the World News TV channel that most people are familiar with because it's on all of the hotel rooms around the world, and the World Service English Radio. But then we also have services in over 40 local languages, which can broadcast across TV, radio, and then all of them have digital sites and social media. So our insight team deals with all of that basically, and that can cover measurement, digital measurement tracking, brand tracking, audience measurement. So every year we do a big study that tracks BBC reach globally, which includes modeling from previous surveys, but then also new surveys in each of our major markets. And then we also do more kind of behavioral studies that look at the social importance of news, changing media landscapes, changing behaviors, perceptions of the BBC in the different markets that we are operate in. So it's quite varied. It's a lot. It covers a lots of different methodologies, and it's really interesting.
Yeah, it's quite I can only imagine also the responsibility of the task to keep track on probably one of the most well-recognized news brands out there. It's and especially also well regarded too. So
yeah, depending where you are.
Depending where you are, I suppose.
Yeah, which is also again one of the importance of brand tracking to see how that goes, because it's actually what we were talking about last year in SMR about brand tracking and the fact that because the news cycle changes so quickly and so unpredictably sometimes, that it's really important to keep on top of what your brand proposition is and your perceptions are in markets, because it can change very quickly depending on what is happening in the world.
Okay. May I ask if it's important to state the brand positioning for as well, especially for a news channel? Is it important to say, to remind the audience where you stand, what the values are, if there are changes, or
Yeah, I mean, so the proposition for the BBC in general and the World Service has remained fairly consistent in that we want to provide trusted and independent news to as many people as possible and help them understand the world around them. And that includes underserved audiences, includes younger audiences, people in areas of low press media freedom. They're actually one of our kind of main targets to ensure that they have access continually to unbiased, objective news when they need it. And we're very open about that, but obviously depending on where you are in some markets and that market's history with Britain, basically, it's gonna color your perception of the BBC.
Absolutely.
Especially in terms of if the BBC is covering stories in your market, that can also, raise kind of questions around how impartial we are.
Exactly. No, I can imagine, and I can imagine you can never aim to satisfy absolutely everybody. You will always find voices that are of dissent. So if you were to summarize in a few sentences what tomorrow's topic is going to be in your session.
Yeah, sure. So it is an ongoing project that has been a priority for the business for a long time. And we've finally managed to bring it all together in one cohesive approach, which is about tackling the gap in gender consumption. So our research shows continually that we reach more men on a global level than women. And again, going back to the earlier point, we want to make sure that we're reaching all audiences. All audiences deserve to have access to trusted, independent news that empowers them, helps them take control of what's going on, gives them a better understanding. So this is not something that was sitting right with us, and we wanted to improve our reach with women. Clearly, we're not doing enough to serve this audience. And so the research, the presentation tomorrow covers the main findings from this research.
Okay. Is that I can imagine that also like this research, especially such an in such an international scope, on such a large demographic, it like I can only imagine what the I don't know like the differences of I mean because I was tempted to ask, did you find out the why? Why is it that women may not be consuming news as much as men in many of the countries? And as I was about to say this, I just started thinking like, this is impossible to answer to.
Well, actually, you have touched on one of the key findings of the report, which is that there is an issue with the very question itself, because women are not a monolith. You know, they're not homogenous. It's very dependent on lifestyle and life stages, circumstances. It's going to be different in different markets. And as we went through the research in the different stages, particularly when we started doing more sophisticated data science on our data sets, it became clear that it was much more about other factors than just gender. But there are also, to come to the earlier point around what's in our control and what's not in our control, there is still the legacy of patriarchy in a lot of the markets that we operate in, especially the ones where we have some of our highest reach. And that is going to negatively impact women much more so than men. And that is something that has an impact on news consumption down the line too. So that's important to recognize. But we still saw a gap in gender consumption even in more developed markets. It exists in the UK, it exists in the US. And so it's important to understand why that was as well. So it's a real mixture of factors.
Do you think it could have I'm trying to simplify a little bit, but do you think it could have the same underlying reason? At the end of the day, you can say, or I think that I would say that countries like the US, the UK, they are still, but
Absolutely.
the patriarchy still is.
Kind of seen, and it's been talked about in other like external literature as well, so it's nothing new. But basically, our data confirmed the fact that it still exists what we were calling structural barriers, which are the more kind of like barriers towards education and employment or healthcare, etc. But then something that was called mindset barriers, which are more conceptual, which is about gendered social norms. And there is a gendered social norm index report, which is separate to this. We didn't do it, but it's brilliant if you have the chance to look into it, which is talking around, for instance, the expectation of women to do the bulk of childcare and domestic labor. And that's still very much prevalent, even in like, Anglophone or Western or European markets, and has actually been exacerbated in the wake of things like the pandemic, where we saw that, lockdown actually caused more of these norms to reassert themselves and women being pushed back into this role.
Sure.
And there's lots of studies that show that even if you're still a woman who's working full-time as much as your partner, you're still expected to spend a lot more time on unpaid domestic labor through, chores, laundry, cooking, childcare, the emotional burden that's also associated with this. There's a really good study in the UK that was talking specifically around news avoidance in women. And they found that that was connected to the additional emotional burden related to the fact that they're expected to do the bulk of childcare and caring for extended family members. And because of that, they offloaded the mental effort of negative news to their male partner, who was doing less of that. And so it was almost a division of labor to be able to save their own mental health.
All right. So basically, it was a choice to avoid consuming news,
because
which oftentimes are exactly.
Yeah, and they already had too much of the emotional labor connected with things like childcare.
Wow.
So it's like the mental capacity is kind of at full essentially, and so you offload it to your partner who is not dealing with that.
Okay, so I see like a lot of these topics are actually they touch on either stereotypes or cultural part of the cultural establishment, right? This is not something that I can imagine that you expect to change, or definitely not overnight. How, as a company, you're trying to reach to this demographic, what are, or if you can give some of the examples of how else you can reach this demographic, um, while understanding all these cultural nuances.
Well, it's interesting that you asked this because we're going to start the presentation tomorrow with a bit of an interactive element. But what it's trying to do is to show that in order to answer that question and find out what we need to do, you do need to challenge existing stereotypes. You need to find out what they are and then challenge them to see if they're true or false, which is one of the main reasons for this research, actually. And these assumptions are internal because, again, we're talking about the World Service. It is massive. It is over 40 languages. It operates in many countries. All of those languages have their own bureau or their own team of editors and journalists, some of them who've been working for decades and have, their own thoughts about why we're not reaching women or how to reach women. And because, again, it can be difficult to localize all this knowledge, you have all of these multiple internal efforts going on over time to try and address the problem. Some work, some doesn't work. People don't know why it doesn't work. The stereotypes are at play again, and we have a list of stereotypes in the presentation that we then kind of debunk a little bit later on. But that's one of the key steps first, is to identify almost like the mindset barriers again.
Exactly.
Before you can actually address what needs to be done.
Exactly, to basically to really have a clear image of what you have ahead, what the challenge really is, right?
Yeah, because if people have a stereotype or a thing in mind of like, well, this is never going to work because of X, then you can bring findings and it's not going to stick. It's not going to drive change because you haven't actually addressed the barrier that people have been holding on to. So, like, for instance, one of them is that women are just not interested in politics. We've heard this from people in teams saying, well, we're never going to be able to achieve better reach because we do a lot of politics content and if just women don't care. So it's important to know that, so that we can then address that and trying to actually use the research to address it properly.
It is funny. That sounds a little bit like a lazy excuse to me.
But like it's one that you see if you, for instance, if you look at the tracking data and go, oh, politics doesn't do well, or like if you do a survey or something without digging into it, which is one of the reasons why we did mixed methods to actually compare claims data with actual ethnographic and understanding what people are talking about and using in-depth interviews to get into it a little bit more. We can understand of like, okay, so politics means different things. There's politics which exists in the sphere of government and politicians, but then there's politics in terms of like local policy that affects every day in terms of education, strikes, or local council, whatever, that lots of women are very interested in and feel a strong need to keep up to date with or whatever, but they wouldn't necessarily call it politics. So that's actually like a perception barrier even in the mind of the audience.
I see. What I get the sense as well is that in order to really assess this problem, you sort of had to start with a blank page, get all these prejudices aside, then see which ones really exist, and then continue with the research, right? Like there must be a huge set of preconceptions that we could begin with.
It was important to understand the preconceptions, and we go again in the presentation. We've got all of the kind of the order of what we did, existing literature to understand where the gaps are in the studies that have been done previously, and then again the point of doing the qual, the ethnography, was to really just kind of allow women almost to speak for themselves or their behavior to speak for themselves without us immediately drawing up a survey with our own hypotheses. So you do the qual first, you do the ethnography, you do the interviews, and then from that you do the analysis, create hypothesis based of it, and scale it in a survey. And that was really important to follow that step.
Okay. A small question out of curiosity as well. In your studies, you like you say, you found basically lower consumption of news from women, more or less across the globe, basically. Did you also find it across all age groups?
Well, again, that's interesting, and we would say also, to go back to the first point of the sentence, lower the men across all regions. relative to the news consumption of men in that region, because you may have much higher news consumption, for instance, let's say in the US. And so women in the US will also have much higher news consumption than women somewhere else. But again, relative to the men in that region, it will be a bit lower. So one of the things that we go into is, again, less about gender and more about life stage and circumstance. And it also applies to age as well. So for instance, it's interesting, one of the groups that has the most kind of level news consumption behavior are students, because at that time you're probably at your most level in terms of life stage as well. You haven't had kids yet, you don't have like as many domestic responsibilities, similar age, maybe at uni, and we see actually almost level news consumption within this group. And then as life continues and you get more responsibilities, things start to change a little bit.
I see. And I guess as part of the findings or part of the proposals or the recommendations that you may have given to like your stakeholders, to the company, could you or did you find perhaps that there was a more effective way of reaching to some of these groups? So for example, maybe some groups would consume more, imagine, visual content, shorter videos, because perhaps that is what they can consume. What you were saying, uh, some lifestyles, they already have too much in their heads. They cannot just consume an entire newspaper of negative news because that would be overwhelming.
Yeah.
But maybe like shorter videos in which they are like, okay, fine, got the idea.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, platform and format definitely form part of our recommendations, and also the concept of time, because almost all of our groups feel that they're pressed for time, men as well as women, feel that maybe news is more of a chore rather than enjoyment. But the news needs to fit into their daily schedule. And we also know that there are particular times of day where people are more likely to consume one type of news versus another. So you might be scrolling on social, during the day, on work, or like, just scanning the headlines, but you might watch a longer documentary in the evening or, read a long read. But then the frame of mind and the emotional need comes into play, where we have people saying, well, I'm not going to consume negative news before I go to bed, because I want to sleep well. So when's the right time for that kind of news? And yeah, it plays a part. And again, it's different depending on your audience group. So students can be a bit more receptive to some things because they have, some of them, the easiest lifestyle. Again, they have the least responsibilities, whereas working families, parents who are running around with their kids and also balancing a full-time job, they can consume news on lots of different platforms, but much shorter time periods. So what do they need?
Yeah, exactly. Well, this is actually, it looks actually like such a massive study.
It kept
because
growing.
yeah,
Scope kept growing as we were doing it. Yeah.
It is. What do you say? I mean, at the end of the day, you are basically studying an entire half of the planet, and as you were saying, it's not a monolithic concept. Like by dividing by geography, by age, by however you want, socioeconomic status and everything, it could have given you, I can only imagine the trove of data and information and insights that you could have extracted from that. So it's
great. It's ongoing. It's been a long process. I think pretty much everyone in the team has been involved at some point. I only joined the BBC halfway through the project, so the qual was already done when I came in, and then I was more dealing with the quant. But yeah, it's been really interesting as well to finally bring in a lot of the data sets that we had already. So as well, in the presentation tomorrow, we're looking to the digital content analysis that was done. So all of the content produced across different topics, all the different languages, and then where we have gender-based data, being able to kind of code them by themes and by treatment to be able to see what actually works with women and give that information, which is really quite actionable to our editorial team, and then match it back to the ethnography that we were doing and the survey to kind of create a holistic picture. It's been quite exciting.
Yeah. Quite a task at hand.
Yeah.
Gonna say that.
Interesting one and a good one to do. Yeah.
No, very interesting. Well, thank you so much, Maria, for being here. It's been a pleasure. I actually I really hope to find the time to to see the presentation tomorrow. For those those who are not here after Congress, I'm pretty sure that the presentation is going to be recorded. We'll process it, and we will we will place it in Esomar's repository in ANA, so Esomar members will be able to find the presentation online. Other than that, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, and to everybody else, thank you for tuning in. I hope you find it just as interesting. We will continue with other sessions of talking insights throughout these days at our Esomar Congress here in Amsterdam. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.